Hello and welcome to Life Reviewed. This is episode 7 and part 7 of my Planet of the Apes retrospective. Today I'm going to be taking a look at Rise of the Planet of the Apes from 2011, directed by Rupert Wyatt, written by Rick Jaffa and Amanda Silver, and starring as the Apes Andy Serkis as Caesar, Karen Knovel as Maurice, Terry Notary as Rocket, Richard Ridings as Buck, and Christopher Gordon as Koba. As the human characters, we have James Franco as Will Rodman, Frida Pinto as Carolyn Arana, John Lithgow as Charles Rodman, Brian Cox as John Landon, Tom Felton as Dodge Landon, and David Oyelowo as Stephen Jacobs. Let's get into the plot. Will Rodman, a scientist at the San Francisco biotech company Gensys, is testing the viral-based drug ALZ-112 on chimpanzees to find a cure for Alzheimer's disease. ALZ-112 is given to a chimp named Bright Eyes, greatly increasing her intelligence. But then, during Will's presentation for the drug, Bright Eyes is forced from her cage, goes on a rampage, and is shot to death. Will's boss, Stephen Jacobs, terminates the project and has the chimp slaughtered. However, Will's assistant, Robert Franklin, discovers that the reason for Bright Eye's rampage was that she had given birth to an infant chimp. Will reluctantly agrees to take in the chimp, who is named Caesar. Will learns that Caesar has inherited his mother's intelligence and decides to raise him. 3 years later, Will introduces Caesar to the Redwood Forest at Muir Woods National Monument. Meanwhile, Will treats his dementia-suffering father, Charles, with ALZ-112, which seems to restore his cognitive ability. 5 years later, when Caesar reaches adolescence and sees a dog on a leash like his own, he questions his identity and learns of his origins from Will. Meanwhile, Charles' condition returns as he becomes resistant to ALZ-112. Caesar injures a neighbor, Douglas Hunsaker, while defending a confused Charles. As a result, he's placed in a primate shelter where he's tormented by a chimp named Rocket and the chief guard, Dodge Landon, but also where he befriends an orangutan named Maurice, who came from a circus. Caesar learns how to unlock his cage, gaining free access to the common area. With the assistance of a gorilla named Buck, he confronts the sanctuary's alpha, Rocket, and claims that position. Meanwhile, Jacobs clears development of a more powerful, gaseous version of the drug, ALZ-113, when Will tells him it can also improve intelligence. Will takes the drug home to try to save his father, but Charles declines further treatment and dies overnight. After attempting to test the drug on a scarred bonobo test subject named Koba, Franklin becomes exposed to ALZ-113 and becomes ill. Attempting to warn Will at his home, he sneezes blood onto Hunsaker and is later discovered dead. Will attempts to reclaim Caesar, but the chimp refuses to go home with him so he could look after the other apes. Instead, he escapes from the facility and returns to Will's house, where he takes canisters of the ALZ-113. Upon returning, Caesar releases the gas, and it allows it to enhance the intelligence of the other apes. When Dodge attempts to get him back into his cage, Caesar speaks for the first time, yelling, "No!" and gets in a fight, which inadvertently leads to Dodge's death. The apes flee the facility, release the remaining chimps from Gensys, and free more apes from the San Francisco Zoo on the way. A battle ensues as the ape army fights their way past a police blockade on the Golden Gate Bridge to escape into the Redwood Forest. Buck sacrifices himself to save Caesar by jumping into the helicopter in which Jacobs is riding. The helicopter crashes onto the bridge, trapping Jacobs in the wreckage. Koba seizes his chance for revenge and sends Jacob falling to his death in the river below. As the apes find their way into the forest, Will arrives and warns Caesar that the humans will hunt them down and begs him to return home. In response, Caesar hugs him and says that Caesar is home. Will, realizing that this is indeed their last goodbye, respects Caesar's wishes. The apes embrace their new lifestyle in the forest. In a mid-credits scene, an infected Hunsaker leaves his house for work as an airline pilot, arriving at San Francisco International Airport for his flight to Paris. His nose begins to drip blood onto the floor. A graphic traces the spread of the humanity-ravaging virus across the globe via international flight routes. So that's the plot of Rise of the Planet of the Apes, but it does no justice to the emotional resonance that they are able to get, specifically from Caesar, but from the apes in this film. And that's what sets this new franchise not just apart from all the other Planet of the Apes movies, but just from movies with CGI characters in general, or any trilogy that's been made in the last 25 years. This one really stands out. And I'm actually ashamed to say I didn't see this film in theaters. I remember wanting to go, and for whatever reason, never got around to it. When it came out on video, I kind of didn't even have any expectations, and I remember watching it and immediately being blown away. I had no idea that they were going to make the apes have this much, show this much emotion and have, this much, personality without even having to talk. I love the way, I remember immediately falling in love with the scene of Maurice subtitling to Caesar across the cages. I thought that was so unique and different, something we hadn't seen in the other films. And lo and behold, we'll get a lot more of that in the following two films. But I recognized right away how excellent this film really is, and that in the right hands, that this could be the definitive Planet of the Apes series if they were to keep this level of quality throughout all three films. And I won't spoil my opinion on the next two movies here, but they certainly do that. So, in the beginning, we have the apes in the cages, we have Bright Eyes, and it's like right away you start to feel for the apes because they're in captivity and, getting abused and getting tested on, and they just have so much human-like qualities in the eyes and the way in their hands and the beautiful CGI work in this film really lends itself to us feeling for these apes. And then when baby Caesar appears, he's so cute and adorable, and we see even Will can't resist, takes him home. To take care of him. And it jumps a few years and jumps 5 years, it jumps around a little bit so we can see him age, and sort of how they've adapted their house for him to live there. But he becomes, part of the family and super intelligent. And at the same time, there's this tragic story of, the father of Will's father, Charles, and he's suffering from dementia or Alzheimer's, and he's really starting to lose it. And Caesar is actually really good for him because it gives him a companion when Will's not there, and they sort of form a bond as well. And then we see Will administer the ALZ 112 to his father, and he gets better. And it's this great moment, this great human interaction that's happening at the same times as all this emotional stuff with Caesar and Caesar growing up. So at this point, I think it's really strong. I think the only negative thing to say about this movie is that some of the human characters are a little flat in comparison to, how we feel about the ape characters. So, his love interest, Will's love interest, Caroline, she has almost nothing to do. She's a veterinarian, but she's dating Will for like 5 years, and Will finally unveils what's behind a sheet in the kitchen and all his work about that Caesar is from a testing lab, and kind of like that. It just feels disingenuous, that he wouldn't take 5 years to explain that to her, and that I don't really care for that. Some of the other characters, his boss Stephen Jacobs, is a little too much of a businessman villain. But I mean, the stuff with his father Charles is genuine and really emotional. Then there's this big change in the movie when Caesar bites the neighbor Hunsicker, bites his finger after trying to defend Charles. And we see Caesar, taken away from Will and put in this reserve, or whatever it's called, for chimps, for apes. And this place is also giving apes two testing labs, actually providing Genesis with apes. And so he's in this shelter, but it's not really safe there either. And there's a hierarchy, which is really where this movie takes off. Because the alpha is Rocket. He's this muscular, hairless chimp that's immediately picking on Caesar, and he's in charge of everybody. We see Buck, the gorilla, who's massive, in this cage, and he's in his own little thing. He doesn't get to play with the other chimps, and he never comes out, and he's always just growling from his cage. And then we meet Maurice, and they're doing their subtitle, their sign language to each other. And he's like befriending him, and so you have these different apes that he's forming a dynamic with, and they all have different personalities, which is really special because they're not talking, and we are getting to know these characters, but we're doing it through their emotions and through their eyes, and it's even more incredible because it's all done in CGI. At the same time, there's another ape that's being tested on with the new drug at Genesis, ALZ-113, named Koba. And he's an ape that's been like a lab ape for a long time, and he's all scarred up and has one eye is white and been slashed, and he's a mess. It's really, really scary looking. And Caesar frees him, and he joins the group later on. But during all this, we have Harry Potter's Draco Malfoy, Tom Felton, playing the son of the guy who runs the shelter. And he's a real ass, but he gets to, he makes all the cages spark, and he's always with like a taser, and he's always tormenting the apes. He gets to yell some famous lines from the original film, it's a madhouse, it's a madhouse, and then he gets to yell, take your stinking paw off me, you damn dirty ape, later on with Caesar, before Caesar finally speaks, no. And, just like Caesar was the first ape to speak, in the original franchise, they took that part of the original timeline where Aldo was the ape that first said no. Caesar's first word is no. So it's kind of mixing both the original timeline and the new timeline of the original series, which is great for Apes fans. So there's some good stuff here. There's also some really sad moments, like when Caesar realizes that he can't leave, and he draws with like a rock a circle which is representative of the window in Will's house that he used to look out of, and he's kind of pressing his head against it, missing his old home. And there's some really sad stuff, and Will's actively trying to get Caesar out, but he's unable to do so because it's like a court order. And so then as Caesar has kind of taken control of all the apes, and they're kind of rallying around him, Will comes to get him out, and he doesn't want to leave. He wants to stay. He closes the cage and is like, I'm staying here, basically. And then that night, Caesar's super smart. So Caesar's figured out how to break out. He's figured out how to get Buck out of the cage. And that's another scene of how he becomes the alpha. He hits Rocket with like a gas can and then lets Buck come out of the cage. Buck gets to run around free. And then, Caesar's standing there with Buck, like, ready to fight Rocket. And Rocket's just like, yeah, no, I'll serve you. That's fine. So then Caesar goes and he realizes these apes are nowhere near as smart as him. So he goes and gets the drug out of Will's refrigerator, comes back and unleashes it on all the apes, and now all the apes have the increased intelligence. They break out, they go to Genesis, they free all those apes, they grab Koba, and then they go to a zoo and they get a bunch of dumb apes, but the dumb apes get out of the zoo and want to follow them too. Then there's an all-out battle on the Golden Gate Bridge, and this is like taking the battle from Conquest in like times 100. They are riding horses, they're moving buses as like using it as a shield. All the gorillas are pushing a bus. It was like a shield from bullets. You got the orangutans like going underneath the bridge. You've got the chimps climbing the to the top into the fog. And you have an all-out battle, and everything looks amazing. It's just fantastic action. Buck sacrifices himself, jumps, leaps onto the helicopter, spinning as they're like shooting bullets into his chest. And but you see that Koba and Rocket and Maurice are becoming like Caesar's right hand and left hand guys. Like that's his main squad. Which is cool to kind of start seeing the core of like a main group of characters form. And once they've won the battle on the bridge, they do make it to the redwood forest, and they all climb up into the trees, and then that's when Will comes to get Caesar, and Caesar, talks to Will for the first time. Caesar is home, and Will kind of lets him go. And the movie ends on this very optimistic note with like Rocket, Maurice, Koba, Caesar, all up in the trees, looking at the skyline with all the apes around them, and like this is like a perfect origin movie to set up a fantastic trilogy or series. Then mid credits, the credits roll, and mid credits we do see Hunsaker, the neighbor. As he is the pilot, he's going off, and you see through a graphic that he spread the virus all over the world. And I think this is a really awesome choice, because doing a whole nother film about the spread of the virus and sort of how the apes are in the redwood, developing their community, would probably have been pretty boring. What they do from here to dawn is they jump ahead where it's already laid waste to everything, and the apes have already developed so much, and it's just such an intelligent idea. That being said, there is a novel, and I'm going to consider it a canon novel because it's called the official movie prequel to Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, and it takes place between Rise and Dawn. It's called Dawn of the Planet of the Apes Firestorm, and it's a novel I've read a bit of it, and it starts just days after the battle on the Golden Gate Bridge. And it really starts to talk about exactly what I just said, the spread of the virus and the apes kind of developing their community out in the forest. And I think this was a much smarter idea. I think that it is the story better served in a novel than in a film. And it lets these movies move at a quick pace, and knows the audience is smart enough to understand that the virus spread just from that scene in the credits. So I've given a lot of credit to the CGI and not enough to the actual who actually deserves the credit, and that's the motion capture. So Andy Serkis and his team and the other actors playing the other apes are beyond incredible. They lend their bodies to this incredible performance that is, it's amazing that a human is performing as an ape and making the ape feel more human. It's flawless execution, and it's what sells this whole franchise. Andy Serkis, I would love to see this man get an Oscar nomination for War of the Planet of the Apes, but this art is not recognized as much as it should be. And he has a massive influence on how the character of Caesar came to be and came together, and that emotional resonance I talked about in the beginning of, that is captured from this motion capture process is just absolutely fantastic. So overall, I think that this is a knockout. I think for my score, I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. It's almost a 10 out of 10. I think there is a couple of weak human characters, and it doesn't do as much with the characters of the apes as future films, for sure. But overall, I think it's almost perfect, and it starts off a beautiful franchise, and this is a great way to tell an original origin story in a film. So there you have it, Rise of the Planet of the Apes. Thank you for listening to Life Reviewed. I'll be back with my review of Dawn of the Planet of the Apes next, so please like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you then.